Navigating the Four podcast, where we discuss all things faith, healing, leadership, and communication. Exploring the topic of communication, I'm Matt Barker, and I'm joined by the other hosts of the podcast. Tackling the topic of faith, we have Freed Hardeman Professor of Bible, Matt Cook.
Hey, guys.
Exploring the perspective of leadership, we have Assistant Dean of Emerging and Innovative Programs at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Jared Gott.
Hello.
And giving us this perspective of all things mental health, we have Director of the University Counseling Center at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Nathan Judd.
Hey.
All right, thanks for joining us for this episode of Navigating the Four, where we bring you real talk, fresh perspectives, and a few laughs along the way. Whether you're in the middle of figuring out life or just here for some good conversation, you're in the right place. So grab a seat, maybe a cup of coffee, and let's start navigating the four together. All right, welcome to Season 2, Episode 3, where we'll be tackling the topic of mental health and faith and answering the question, is it a sin to struggle with mental health? And for that, I'm going to turn it over to our in-house counselor, Mr. Nathan Judd.
Cliff notes are, it is absolutely a sin to struggle with mental health, and that is blackened. I'm just kidding. Obviously, spoiler alert, I don't think it is, but I grew up in the 80s, like slap some water on it, dust it off, hold it in. So I'm becoming a much more patient, that may be a stretch, but
I just hope so, since you're a counselor.
Yeah, I went into the field. It was just a weird path into the field. I didn't have that journey of like this really meaningful, it was my calling. But getting there, it's definitely helped me to grow in my own mental health. But I'm just curious to get a little bit of a conversation started about this. And it's being discussed more among religious and spiritual communities, I think. But I am curious, what did you guys grow up hearing about faith, about mental health, and how those coincide together?
So I don't know that I really heard a lot, period, about mental health growing up. Now, you just asked the question like mental health and faith. I'm going to go ahead and say zero on that part, right? Like, I don't think I ever heard those two sort of combined. I mean, I heard conversations of this person has a lot of stress. This person has a lot of anxiety. They're, dealing with some stuff in the context of like they're struggling, but never like a productive conversation, right, about mental health and faith, and really not a lot of productive conversations about mental health in general. Like you said, I mean, growing up, I was born in 85, so I was in school all during the 90s. I don't remember a lot of conversations about mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you did, a lot of times it was more of the extreme. So like if you heard mental health, it was more of a negative, like they're in a very extreme situation. I mean, I think of this is something that's always struck with me. This was before I was at Freed Hardeman, but a lot of times what you think about when you heard mental health is the Make a Music show that came out. It was before
that was Sig.
Stir Crazy, right?
Yeah,
and people in the straight jackets, in the very beginning, it was like frightening. It was like a very like weird show, like music was playing, and you kind of have those images that come to your mind. It's like people that struggle with mental health, they're in the hospital or some maybe extreme case of it, and now it's discussed more where there's a lot of different variations of that, where there's some that maybe there's things you can do and not have to be in a hospital for it. So I think there's a little bit of misconceptions when I was growing up with, a lot of times it was more extreme case of mental health struggles where you're in a hospital or something like that.
I didn't think about this till just now. Nathan, I assume you might know the answer to this. Was there a university counseling center while we were students?
Oh, wow.
So
I don't know if I know the answer to that.
I don't think there was.
I don't
remember there being
I don't remember one.
I think the teachers in the counseling department kind of
got
did a lot of the work. I remember sending somebody to talk to a teacher of mine.
Right,
and, but I don't think the UCC was there.
I'd never really thought about that till this.
That's
second.
really interesting. You bring up that Make a Music show. I was a student then. Were you here yet for that one?
No, that was before me.
And I hadn't thought about that in years, but I actually there was a family, and there were 2 or 3 brothers who were on campus. One of them struggled with some significant mental illness issues at times, right? And in the past, he'd really struggled, and they were super, super offended by that show. And I remember thinking that may have been one of the first times I thought, oh wait, there are real people who are functioning normally in my life, and I know them, who this has impacted in significant ways. I grew up in West Virginia in the hills, and so a little more rough and tumble, very much so like slap a Band-Aid on it, get over it. And it never really reached awareness, especially in church contexts. Like it didn't reach your awareness until, like Matt Barker said, it got really significant. And someone had to go to a hospital or someone self-harmed, right? And so or a marriage was falling apart, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you kind of knew something was going on. Other than that, you tended to think, just being honest about I was born in December of 80. I don't know why I say December. It makes me feel a little later in 1980.
Oh, yeah, you're
younger,
definitely
right?
81.
Yeah, almost 81. We just viewed people who probably now we would be more compassionate towards. It's just weird. Like they were weird, and we weren't thinking more about mental health and.
Yeah, and we seem to be a
Bible
little
would say.
more private maybe about it. So we didn't, like, people would say, well, don't air the dirty laundry of, whatever's going on with you or our family. It was a little bit more private. People held those things a little bit in. Now you hear people discussing it a little bit more freely, telling about their struggles, and people being a little bit more, not necessarily accepting of it, but they're a little more understanding and maybe compassionate, like Matt said, I think.
And I don't know, I think here, if we were to say, okay, we need to see a counselor, one of our kids needs to see a counselor, we've got all kinds of options, right? Growing up, I don't know what we would have done.
Yeah.
Where I'm from, who we would have seen.
I ended up, I think I've shared my getting stuck in the elevator story. My dad and mom sent me to, I don't even remember his name, but it was a very regimented, like, let's get over this fear of elevators. So I remember talking about elevators, drawing a picture of elevators, and then I like Legos a lot. And so he had me build an elevator out of Legos and then had me ride different elevators around Chattanooga. The last one of which was the Marriott. That was the one that was the scariest to think of. 17 stories, a glass elevator, still there. And
So
I thought it was stuck.
Did it work, the counseling that you... the way
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
done?
I mean, I rode the elevator up here
Yeah.
today, talking about how stinky it was. But yeah, for a while.
Let's just go ahead and add that he was complaining about how stinky the elevator was,
But he
and
brought
then
sardines.
brought sardines and crackers into this room.
Okay, which was
Whole room
worse, the
smells.
sardines or the elevator? Well, you didn't get on the
I
elevator.
actually couldn't smell the sardines, if I'm being honest.
Thank you. Yeah, the elevator's awful.
Walk out of the room, come back in, you'll smell it.
We're on a bit of a tangent.
Sorry.
Where was I going with that?
To the elevator.
Yeah, just talking about your struggles
That you had
growing up,
access-
and you had access
Oh,
to
to
counseling.
counseling.
Yeah.
Well, but my point in that, okay, so, and by the way, I remember my parents like taking me to the mall to ride elevators and physically pulling me into elevators while I was screaming, like in public spaces. And like, you can imagine what that looked like. But yeah, I'm worked. I got a little toy car set after I finished the treatment plan, and yeah, it was cool. But my point in that is, even that, I mean, it was great, but it wasn't like this necessarily compassionate approach. It was like very clinical. I mean, yeah, it worked, but I think we have different ways of looking at things nowadays. I was too young to know, but I think there was a lot of shame around needing to reach out to a counselor. And my experience in church is that it's a very shaming message. There's something wrong with me. I shouldn't feel this way. If I'm anxious, I don't have enough faith in God. If I have depression, then I'm not joyful enough. I've started to do some reading around that. A book that I read that we may have a podcast on later on, he just framed it in a different way, where he talked about the commandments of don't fear, don't worry, is more about like a dad comforting their son who's afraid. And it's not a shaming, stop being afraid, you're so weak. It's just comfort, like you don't have to be afraid. And so that's kind of the tone that I want to come into this episode with, to see if that lands for you guys. As I've read that tone into scripture, it seemed like it fit every time. It's never not fit.
I've never thought about what you just said until you said it. And from the other, I guess from the opposite side, like I don't know that I've ever read or have heard anyone teach the commands like be not afraid, right?
Yeah.
Don't fear, as anything but comfort.
Yeah. Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That was not my experience.
I don't know that I've ever. Now, that being said, right, like you asked, like, how did you grow up hearing about mental health and faith? I don't know that I ever did. I certainly don't remember it or can recall it. But I don't know that I ever heard anybody specifically get into, like, if you have fear, you've done wrong, kind of a thing. Yes, I have heard, like, hey, don't be anxious, right? The birds of the air are taking care of the flowers of the field, and so we don't have to worry about those things. But I don't know that I've ever hearing it as like, you better not worry. More of a, you don't have to worry.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you had that experience. That wasn't my experience.
Sure, right. I'm not saying that's universal. Certainly, that's just how I think I've always thought about this.
I remember I spoke about this in chapel one time, but the story about the storm at the sea, and in my mind, Jesus rebuked them for being afraid, and that's not what Scripture says. Actually, it says he rebuked the winds and the waves.
Right.
And then 2 different accounts that I'm thinking of. One, he said, "Oh, you of little faith," and the other one, he said, "You who have no faith." There's some subtle differences in there too, but more comforting to them. But in my mind, I remembered it being, he rebuked them, and it's not what it said. But that's what I was taught growing up. Matt Cook, curious if just thinking about weakness and brokenness in Scripture, and if anything rises to the surface for you, is just thinking about that.
I mean, my first instinct is to just think about the Psalms, right? How many times might someone say to one of the psalmists, "Oh, toughen up a little bit, get over it."
Yeah.
But they are very honest. Their grief and their frustration and their anger and their brokenness to God in the Psalms. Obviously, David would fall into those categories. I think about Hannah, like her brokenness over infertility. Boy, that's pretty serious stuff. And then even the prime example, the one that everybody thinks about, is Elijah gets so discouraged and depressed that he asks God to take his life. So this is absolutely a theme found in Scripture.
Yeah, one that I thought of was, we think about Moses, and really when I thought about him was anxiousness and this whole idea of, I don't feel like, I'm my slow of speech, slow of tongue, all those kinds of things. I don't feel qualified to do what you're calling me to do. A lot of anxiety there. You sense that in I don't know if I'm up for the challenge of what you're telling me to do here. And the flip side of that too, we also see the account where just a few verses later there in Exodus chapter 4, where he has that support system that's given to him. So it's kind of that idea of we have these anxiousness, but God will provide things for us that will help us get through those anxiousness. He provided Aaron to help him through some of those challenges with the speech and different things that maybe he didn't feel capable of. So anxiousness, particularly Moses, came to mind for me with not feeling comfortable in what God was calling him to do. Just like all of us probably at times feel uncomfortable with certain things that we might not feel comfortable doing and have maybe a lot of anxiousness as a result of it.
I mean, Elijah was my default. That's the one, like you said, that I immediately thought of. I also thought of Peter, right? Because you see kind of this whole journey of him being by Jesus' side up until the denial, right? And then kind of the next picture we see or account we see of Peter is him going back to just what he knows, right? What's familiar. He's fishing again. And his reactions then when Jesus appears, both after the tomb, in the room with the apostles, on the shore, just all his reactions are maybe not the weakness, but certainly brokenness, right? It's just kind of what I think of. You had this whole time with Jesus, and then you do the denial piece and just the brokenness we kind of see after that.
I wonder I don't think I've ever thought about this until now, what Paul went through. And he lists it in 2 Corinthians 11. How much of that would we classify as trauma today? I mean, you've got danger at sea, danger from false brothers, and toil and hardship. How many times, let's say 3 times shipwrecked,
stoning,
countless beatings, often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews, the 40 lashes less 1. Shipwrecked 3 times, adrift at sea. And then he adds, apart from other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. He's planted all these churches. He's got baby churches all over the Mediterranean. Do you think he ever was sleepless at night? And I even think about our church leaders. I know I've heard my elders say there are certain issues that leaves them sleepless. And I don't know if we call it clinical anxiety, right? But it's still some sort of struggle that's causing us to be anxious and lose sleep.
Definitely could be. I like that as we're thinking about all of this because, I'm coming in through the lens of picturing the congregation, but a lot of times the leadership is struggling and feels like they're not allowed to struggle because they have to be there for everybody else. And good segue. So how have you guys seen or experienced the church responding to people who struggle with mental health?
I think, as we already talked about, perhaps the way that I've seen it handled poorly is just by ignoring it or being dismissive and kind of rolling your eyes at the people who have consistent struggles.
Yeah.
And we used to joke when we lived in Peru. Somebody told us about this. Every church has those people, those special people who are going to monopolize your time. And I wonder how many of those people actually have something else going on from a mental illness perspective. But we always joked that they needed a shirt. You wanted to see them coming that said EGR, extra grace required. I don't know. Don't we wish some of our students wore those? They're coming before they get to you. And I think now, I wonder how many of those EGRs there's something going on here with mental health, and we joke and we try to avoid, or at the same, I don't know. I want to be more compassionate at the same time, acknowledge that, boy, in ministry or in teaching, in any field, except for counseling, where you're actually there to help them full time, this can be draining on a ministry if you're not handling it well, or you don't have the resources to. And I think from a handle it well perspective, I just appreciate that my church leaders are very clear about, listen, if you need help, we'll help find you the help that you need, and we'll pay for it.
Yeah, I think for me, growing up, especially, I'm thinking about my time at church, youth group, things like that. It was really, like Matt said, not really acknowledging it at all. And I think was the challenge. It's they would almost ignore it and not really acknowledge that something was going on. And I don't think it was because they were not sympathetic. I think they just didn't know, they weren't equipped how to handle it. Yeah. And so their default was, I'm just going to, hopefully this will go away. Hopefully they'll get through it. Maybe their friends can help them. But maybe the ministry staff or whatever really didn't do much about it. And it could be because they just didn't really know the best way to handle it, and they didn't feel equipped to do it, and they didn't want to tell them something wrong. And so a lot of times it was just, they just didn't do anything. And I think that was probably true, not just my experience, but other churches as well, because like we talked about before, we didn't have maybe all these resources available where we had a lot of people we could talk to and get kind of, people like Nathan Judd say, hey, what's the best way to handle this situation? I don't feel comfortable at all with this. Just like teaching classes now, if a student comes to me, I'm going to be like, can try my best to help you, but I think the University Counseling Center is probably the place that you need to go because they're more equipped to help you. But back when I was growing up, I don't know if there was really a lot of resources to send them to. So really just the church's response was not really much of a response at all, at least from my experience. And I think it was mainly because they didn't feel equipped to handle it.
Mm-hmm. I think I've seen so many more speakers and churches and et cetera proactively talking about mental health, like in the last 5 to 10 years.
I was going to say now. I would agree. Yeah.
And so I think that is one in the column of handling it well, right? Just sort of putting the tiger on the table and we'll talk through it, and it doesn't have to be this whole taboo thing. I think on the it's been handled poorly side though, and I'm even going to speak to myself, right? It's just kind of a trying to get in the right mindset of how to help. Because when I first encountered, like, I'm dealing with individuals who have something going on with their mental health, right? So often I think of it in the same way that I think of physical health, right? Hey, my throat hurts, right? Okay, we go to the doctor, they run the test, you have strep, here is the medicine, you get better, right? And if you don't get better, then we escalate the treatments and everything like that. Whereas, working with students in different things, hey, I have something going on with my mental health and I'm seeing a counselor. Maybe I changed medications, or something like that. And in my mind originally, I would default to, then you should be getting better. And sometimes that's not the case, right? Like it's just going to be a lifelong thing. And it took me a while to get my mind around that, like, in some of these, there's not improvement. I think you know what I'm saying.
Every person's going to be a little different too. Nathan's experience, probably every person's going to respond differently to different things. Sure. So what works for one might not work for all.
Well, and maybe there is improvement. There is not full healing of this. And so it took me a while to sort of get where I needed to be more compassionate, right? And not be like, wait, we're still dealing with this, right? Like what happened now? Nothing happened. Oh, well then why? Yeah. Why do you feel anxious? Why do you feel depressed again if nothing's triggering it? And it took me a while to be like, that is just something they're going to deal with.
Yeah.
So I think the church as a whole is getting there. Like I said, I think there's been a lot more open conversations about it, but it's required some mental switching, cultural understanding for a lot of people.
So let me ask you, Nathan, I'm guessing I can think of my growing up years of a couple people in church who, and again, I know this is I say inappropriate language. In the field of mental health, this is inappropriate. It's not, when I was a teenager, it's like, man, they're crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? And there was one guy in particular, and I look back now and I don't know what his diagnosis was, schizophrenia, maybe something like that. But he would, once or twice a year, speak up publicly and just say something off the wall, and everybody knew like there was something going on. Now, I'm guessing he had some sort of medical care. I think he was a veteran, right? So I'm sure he received, and he was on some medicines. It came across to a teenager as, man, that's the crazy guy back there. How can churches minister to that kind of person that it's an ongoing issue? Like Jared just said, it's not going to go away. Yeah. right? It's going to be medicated, but this person is going to be a special person among us for a long time and may have struggles with their faith where they're going to be in and out of church. How do we help that person?
Can't go wrong, I think, with saying how would Jesus interact with that individual. I mean, I don't have a blanket answer for you, because there are situations that, I'm not saying this guy, but like I don't want to tell people to run into a situation that's not going to be safe. But not all those situations are unsafe. They're just uncomfortable. And I think just reminding ourselves that these are human beings, that, they've got parents who cared about them or didn't care about them. I mean, either way, like that's kind of touching, but looking at them as human beings and saying, how can I love them? And as a teenager too, it's like I didn't have the skill set. And so my beliefs about that are getting passed down to me, like how people above me are responding. And so I think modeling for the younger generations, like, yeah, he's got some struggles. He was a veteran, and here's what that does to the nervous system. And there's no telling what he's struggling with. Imagine being in his shoes. And so, yeah.
I think it too. I mean, piggybacking off that a little bit, yesterday in church was a good example of this, and the way that the leadership, whether that's the preacher or elders, acknowledge whatever's going on with a person and kind of explaining it a little bit to the people in the audience is always helpful. We had someone, won't give any specific names, but there we had about 3 or 4 responses yesterday. One of those was just struggling with my mental health, right? And the way that our preacher dealt with that was he said, I do know this is not because you haven't prayed about it. I do know this is not because you haven't read your Bible enough. And he went through all the different things that people typically think is something that would be helpful advice to someone maybe struggling with that. And he said, I know that's not you. I know that's not what you're dealing with. He said, but I do know that, we're all here to help you in any way that we can, and went through a whole list of things that we as a church family can do to help those people. So I think part of that too, as a church leadership, it's acknowledging that this is not just some weird thing. This is something that everybody struggles with at some point, trauma, whatever it is. And we need to acknowledge that it's there, but also say, we're willing to help you in any way that we can. And we're not going to make it go away, because that's going to be something that takes time, but we're going to be here to help you along the way and do whatever we can to help you. So I appreciated that with, at least at our church, and that maybe that's something that other churches' leadership could acknowledge it, but also kind of give some helpful advice and not those standard responses that sometimes aren't very helpful.
I think a lot of times people feel the urge to throw scripture to put a Band-Aid on this and make them feel better. And I'm picturing too, like when people would go forward, a lot of times that can be going forward at church, for those who may not understand that wording. But
responding to an altar call.
There you
would be
go.
Similar
yeah, thanks.
Language.
It's like, oh my goodness, what did they do? Did you see this person? And just, again, let's recognize that these are people and they're going forward with a struggle and being vulnerable. And it's not about figuring out what it is. It's, loving them, embracing them as they're coming back. And then I'm also thinking about, again, it's like, oh, just fix it. Just think differently. Just feel better. But in my story, I had this click the other day for me as I was kind of walking out my timeline. I was even in a car accident as a baby that I don't remember. And so you think that affected the way my little baby body responded to things. And so then when fears were confirmed in a cave elevator that, oh my goodness, I can be trapped in this space, and just different versions of that, my nervous system got put through the ringer, and God gave us this incredible ability to adapt to the situation we're in, because, like the gentleman you mentioned, when he's in the overseas or wherever he was and he's getting shot at, or he's dealing with death all around him, the fact that his nervous system is ready to respond at any sign of danger, like that's a pretty cool skill to have. But it doesn't just fix when you change environments. And so just a reminder, like God designed it for a reason, but we need to be patient with ourselves to know it doesn't just go away when we are like, okay, I'm in a different environment now. So there's the battlefield, yes, but there's abusive homes, there's sexual abuse, sexual trauma, there's neglect, there's car accidents and different things like that. But whatever the example of that be, and I'm talking about that from the anxiety perspective, but there can also be the depression side where a child has to adapt to the belief that they're not worth something. That sounds like a horrible thing to say, but maybe in that system that they have, it's good to look at themselves that way, because if they didn't, what are they going to have to deal with otherwise? And so their nervous system gets wired that way. It's God made us adaptable. It's an awesome thing, but it can hurt growing up too. As we kind of come to a close, what do you feel like Christians can do to support those who are struggling with mental health in healthy, non-judgmental ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one, I'll let Matt maybe speak to this a little bit more, but like I think prayer is always the standard answer. Praying for them, helping them through that. And one of the things that deals a little bit with communication here too, which is one of the most important things you can do in communication, is listening. Which is something that counselors do a great job of, because a lot of times counselors probably do more listening than actually talking, because they're trying to figure out exactly what the person's telling them. So from a communication perspective as well, just listening to what someone is going through. I know from my personal experience, if I'm struggling with something, just having someone listen to me means a lot, not really trying to fix the problem, just trying to listen and kind of let me tell them what's going on in my life. I think that's always, so listening and prayer would be two of mine that I would think of.
I liked what Nathan said earlier about just treating them the way Jesus would have treated them. I'm not going to ignore interactions. I'm going to interact with them. I'm going to love them the best I can. If you're in a situation where your time can be easily monopolized by people who struggle, I'm going to be aware of that and try to draw some boundaries where I can. And then I had another thought. This doesn't help the person, but as you were talking about this a minute ago, Nathan, I was thinking about people who have physical disabilities. And sometimes we think about, what will they look like when they're made whole after the resurrection? It's like this beautiful thought of like, wow, look, God will resurrect them and they will be made whole. I want to think the same way about my brothers and sisters who struggle with mental health. Imagine what they'll be like after they're made whole post-resurrection. What will it be like when their brain is no longer struggling as it does, like our physical bodies often do? We forget that like it happens with the brain too. What will it be like when they're made whole again? It's a beautiful thought.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I wrote down, and it's similar to what you said about interactions, is just kindness, right? I mean, people who are struggling with this already may enter the church or a church activity or church function or whatever feeling ostracized or feeling less than, or already self-conscious about, well, if I can't be too transparent. I can't let someone know what's going on. And so just kindness, right? Just welcoming and, hey, it's good to see you. I mean, just showing kindness, just letting them know that, yeah, you matter. We love you. You're here. And then, from there, sure, you may get into other stuff later, but can you just be kind?
Yeah. Just treat people like people. Well, that's all I got, you guys. Hopefully that's helpful to some of the listeners out there. And just love people. That's my thing. Just love them. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I found this quote. We'll close with this. I thought it went along well with this episode. It says, God doesn't promise that our minds will be without worry, but he promises his presence is in the midst of our anxiety. He's always there with us, just like we can be there for those that we interact with as well. So thanks for joining us for today's episode of Navigating the Four. We hope today's conversation sparks something real in your faith, your healing, your leadership, or your communication. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep navigating the four. We'll see you next time on Navigating the Four podcast.